Hi, good afternoon. I am your host, James White. It's the 25th day of February, 2019. I so much appreciate you joining me today. So without further delay, David DuByne, thanks so much for joining me here on Northwest Liberty News.
Well, thank you for contacting me. And, I live over in Asia, and right now it's 5 a.m. So it's a good start for me to get the morning kicked off. And there's so many changes coming. I'm pivoting for interview times. You're going to need to pivot for your life because of what's happening right now. The losses that are going to occur more with the late planting season. We saw and have seen all these record cold events. But let me interject here with one new thing that's just come across the newswire in the last couple of days. The jet streams. There's a commercial airliner where passengers get on. It was a Virgin Atlantic flight, and it was LA to London. They set a world speed record. The jet stream was moving so fast. It was the fastest apparently ever recorded in the jet stream movement. The tailwinds pushed this airplane, commercial airliner, into hypersonic speed where it broke the sound barrier. It was the fastest ever recorded time that a passenger jet transited from LA to London due to this excessive tailwinds. They were pushing over 800 miles per hour on the flight. This is how fast the winds are starting to change in the atmosphere, and you're starting to see the bunching right now of all the jet streams across the planet. This is why we're getting the extreme weather. And James, you and I, we talked so much about this in our previous interviews and conversations about the extremes are here. They're going to affect food production. And that's the reason I'm sitting with you today, because we need to talk about this a little more, explain to viewers what's going on and what they can expect moving forward, how it's going to affect their life, how you can protect yourself, how you can take opportunity and advantage of the greatest, I'll use the word opportunity again. It's the greatest opportunity in human history right at the doorstep at our fingertips right now, because there's more technology, connectivity, wealth, and everything else on the planet that can help us get through what the last prior 3,000 to 5,000 years of civilization didn't have at their fingertips to get set for, cope with, deal with, and find solutions for this grand solar minimum.
David, when I watch your videos, there's one word that continues to come up over and over again, and that's record. Record snowfalls, record temperatures, record winds, record wind chills, record. This, I believe, David, from, of course, our conversations in the past, and I had the wonderful opportunity to interview John Casey last year before he fell ill, and we certainly pray for his speedy recovery. And I think he's making somewhat of a comeback, and we certainly we're rooting for John all the way. But from what I understand from the interviews and stuff that we've talked about, David, and you're certainly way more the expert than I, this is just the beginning. Things are going to get, the record temperatures and the crop loss and the record snowfalls. This is going to be pretty normal for the next few years. Can you please explain that situation to our listening audience, David?
And think about the word record, the lexicon that's also being used across the greater mainstream media as well as independent media. Unprecedented, never seen before, exceptional, unbelievable. These are the types of words that are now describing our weather in every single story. It's not once, if we go back 2 years or 3 years, you would see that how many times out of 10 or how many times out of 100 in news stories where it's unprecedented. You would see it maybe 2% of the time, something like this as we progressed. And you can start to see the increase in the intensity of these events, where before it was 3 months worth of rain or a month worth of rain in a day or 3 months worth of rain in a day. And now we're seeing a full year worth of rain in 3 hours. So my predictions, if you're talking about the intensity ramp up, because we are just at the beginning and the cusp of everything, the weather's going to get incredibly intense, especially through 2019 and 20. This is where the most change is expected in this 2-year period out of all these next 7 to 8 years, is right now, these 2 years, because The jet streams are moving into different places. They're trying to find their own new patterns. So the rain's going to shift. The droughts are going to be here. The intensity, the clash between hot and the cold as these jet streams move. We're starting to see jet streams now just straight north and south, but usually they're undulating and wavy around the planet, or they're just in the wrong place. They're broken. We're seeing an amazing amount of animals in the wrong places due to these extremes. The wildlife is confused as to what's happening. So many things going on. And what I would predict, the caveat there, talking about a year's worth of rain in 3 hours, all unprecedented floods across Australia that killed hundreds of thousands of cows and turned what was north near Papua New Guinea, that whole northern area of Queensland up there, into an inland sea, basically. We're going to be seeing something on the intensity of, in my prediction, my thought of forecasting out, we're going to see something where we'll see a decade of rain in a day, eventually coming around 2021. Imagine if that turns into a snowstorm where it converts from 1 inch of water into a foot of snow, and they're pulling a full decade, or even if it's 5 years of precipitation in a single event in just a day, what would happen? Because you start to see these massive snowfalls across Austria, Italy. When these places are telling you, and France as well, and some of the Pyrenees or the Alps up there bordering on to Italy, if you look at their media, the way they described the snowfall this year was unprecedented. And we're talking about some of the snowiest places on the planet where there's exceptional skiing. They're canceling slalom races. They're canceling ski events due to too much snow. And this is what's happening. Corporate mainstream media not really touching it too much.
Well, David, as you stated, there's so many different things. We're talking about space weather. We're talking about planetary alignment. We're talking about 400-year cycles. Excuse me. We can also talk about the polar shift. This is a known phenomenon. If you follow Ben Davidson, and who I know is a friend of both of ours over at the Suspicious Observers YouTube channel, Ben does a great job over there. Also, we're looking at increased volcanic activity, increased earthquake activity. This is all not fear-mongering, David. This is cyclical. Now, if you could talk, particularly here in this segment, if you could retrace back, I think it's so very interesting, is dynasties always fall, it seems, during the Grand Solar Minimum. The last one, I believe, was the Maunder Minimum. Dynasties always fall, and this has happened throughout history. Could you talk a little bit about that? And when I say dynasties, I'm talking about mainly in China, which I know you have a great knowledge of the Far East, because I believe you reside there or close to there anyway. Could you go over that history, if you don't mind, for us, David, and tell us about what happens typically to empires during a period of the Grand Solar Minimum? So emperors are the most famous that you would know right away, Chinese emperor. But we also need to talk about the Incan Empire, kings and queens. Everywhere you look across our society over the last how many thousands of years where there's written or historical records, you find the same thing. Why did they collapse? Why did they collapse so suddenly? Incredibly stable for centuries, usually 350 years or so. They're very stable. And suddenly, within a decade or two, they've collapsed. Rulership changes. The mandate from heaven is removed. If you're looking at the Chinese side of it, they're only given the dictate to rule and have authority over the people if they have the mandate from heaven. Well, the mandate from heaven for me is the electrical flows into our star, the plasma sheath current. And they had documented all of this. They knew about sunspots and plasma and currents through space, and Birkeland Currents, if you want to know, field-aligned currents running down our poles. They understood all of this. Aurora, they had it all mapped out very cleanly. And they understood when these changes took place in the heavens, it affected the weather on Earth. And their explanation was the mandate from heaven. But what they're really talking about is the way the star, our sun, is affected, and it in turn shifts the intertropical convergence zone. But you got to take a step back, because the jet streams are responsible for the intertropical convergence zone. So as we're seeing right now, the ICTZ, intertropical convergence zone, is now shifting more north.
So we're starting to see a lot of different rainfall patterns, especially in the Sahel, Northern Africa. They're getting pounded with rain. That area is becoming a grassland, kind of much more rainfall area. And as we progress through, I could see why the Chinese were there investing for the last 20 years. Their cycles and understanding of cycles took them back to understand that area is going to green. It could become a new crop production zone as their area in China and northeast China, bordering with North Korea, Heilongjiang, is going to go offline. So if I were China, I would be looking for new food growth spaces as well. That's why this whole string of pearls across the Indian Ocean, delivering back through Jiapu Port over in Myanmar, straight into Yunnan province, and instead of having going around through the Malacca Straits there. This is all, everybody's putting the chess pieces in. And James, let me throw one last thing in here. The Incan Empire collapsed at these exact same times. We got the Mayans collapsing, and look just at our own history in the last 2,000 years around Europe. It's very clean to understand where the riots took place, why the sieges of cities took place. What you also know about historical timelines, because sharing the information is what we need to do with others so we can get a greater picture of it. So, I'm going to ask a question back to you, and just I'm curious what you have studied in history too about timelines in different parts of the world, different centuries, different continents, and what you might know more about North America, where you're at, something with Native American Indians. I'm not sure exactly, but I would really like to find out what you know about that.
David, that's a pretty broad question.
It is. Hopefully you can feel it a brushstroke or something there.
Well, I consider myself sort of a generalist, if you will, and I'm not sure what you're speaking of. I do know. I'm not sure specifically. I should say what you're looking for. I do know one thing though. I do know that we are, as human beings, we think in a linear fashion. We from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, we think linearly, but nature and space works cyclically. It works in cycles. So I think what we're looking at now is another 400 year cycle, as we talked about before. So you can look at. I've read the book. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book by Neil Howe and the Fourth Turning, I think is what it's called. I'm not sure
familiar with the title, but I've never read the book. But continue there.
It talks about this thing that you're talking about, cycles. It talks about every 70 years, things circle back around again. As far as we're prosperous, and then we become decadent, and then things fall apart, and then we turn back around again, and we start back over again. And it's a cycle. Like all becomes in cycles, and it goes through different periods, and they use it like seasons in the year. So that'd be probably, to answer your question, in America, that would be a good study, I think, to talk about cycles in America. Now, as far as worldwide, that's a much longer historical period. And, I don't know, does that answer your question? I'm not really sure. Did you?
All right. You're being a politician, but that's a great answer. Thanks.
I wasn't prepared for you to ask me questions, but it's okay. It's okay. At any rate. Okay. So we're looking at.
James, can I toss in a thing there? Since you mentioned about the 70-year cycle, there's a lot of economists that study this, what you're just talking about, the fourth turning. Economists have mapped this out. That's what they do. They map out the cycles of economy based on repeating cycles. Now, this is where these two worlds are crossing at the moment. There's a huge awakening amongst economists that we're into this grand solar minimum. So what a lot of them are doing is just going further back and mapping out. So instead of being 70 years, they're just mapping out how many of those 70-year cycles are there. And can they find these correlations going back on the 400-year, the 1,000, 2,000-year cycles, or the 3,600-year? And they're starting to come up with exact matches now of these economy declines, food price rises, especially in the modern minimum, when they really tagged out the price of barley and the price of rye and how much it rose during these bad harvest years. So they're going back to using the shekel and denarius for different payment systems for silver based on the amount of grains of wheat. So they have thousands and thousands of years of economic record, and now they're intertwining it. So look for this tidal wave, and you're already starting to see the first, especially with Martin Armstrong when he's coming out. Everything from Martin's written words now are about Grand Solar Minimum. Peter Schiff's jumping on it, and you have a whole bunch of others, Gerald Celente. Everybody's getting onto it. Now, once these, more well-known economists get on there, now there's two pincers coming in, and there's a lot more wider, broader view audience. So the wake up.
Coming up on a break, David, here in about 20 seconds. Sorry to cut you off. Why don't you give out your website, your YouTube channel real quick before we go to the break here in about 10 seconds.
Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube, and we'll see you after the break. Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast as well, anywhere podcasts are hosted across the net.
We'll be back after these brief messages here on Northwest Liberty News.
And understanding that these seismic and volcanic events are cyclical, and you'll want to check out Upheaval, Why Catastrophic Earthquakes Will Soon Strike the United States. Leading experts in the geophysical effects of climate change make a strong case for a link between the sun's cycles of behavior with highly destructive earthquakes. The authors explain that when the sun goes into reduced energy phase, a grand solar minimum as we're entering right now, it produces colder weather and the worst earthquakes across the historical timelines. Included are easy-to-understand charts and graphs showing that we face an imminent threat. Find out the status of the threat for California, Alaska, South Carolina, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and many other states and regions across our planet. And if you want to support this broadcast, click the link in the description box below to Upheaval, Why Catastrophic Earthquakes Will Soon Strike the United States, available in both paperback and Kindle versions.
Okay, welcome back to Northwest Liberty News. I'm your host, James White. Appreciate you joining me here today on this 25th day of February 2019. And I'm delighted to be joined by my friend David DuByne from the Adapt 2030 YouTube channel. And we've been talking about the Grand Solar Minimum, which is it's cyclical. I don't know if I'd call it a weather phenomenon, David. I guess it probably would be. It's more than just a weather phenomenon. It's an earth phenomenon. About every 400 years or so, we've been talking about that, and we're just in the middle of it, folks. We just happen to be born at the time that the next Grand Solar Minimum is coming through here, and there's not really a lot that we can do to avoid it. And David, one of the things that I find curious is they still, regardless of all the evidence, regardless of all the books that have been put out, regardless of all the work that you've done, they still want to push the global warming thing as we have record. I think it was a woman that was, I forget her name, she's throwing her hat in the ring for the Democratic Party. And she was at her speech where she was announcing, and she's talking about global warming as the snow was falling down on the people in the audience. I don't know if you remember that scene, but they just can't seem to get away from, no matter what, David, this global warming thing, even as the temperature cools worldwide and records are broken, certainly on a weekly, if sometimes on a daily basis. Can you answer that question for us?
It's my personal opinion, and you could agree or disagree, but I think it's all about global taxes and more control over the citizenry of the population of this entire planet. Nothing more. It's a ploy to tax you more on every service that you utilize and every good you purchase. Nothing more. It's a control device. Look what they've done, roping us into this corner where we have to pay for our energy. We should not have to pay for energy. We could use all these different patents that have been out there for hundreds of years, and some of the most famous would be Nikola Tesla, Marconi, Brown, Rife, and the list goes on. They had I wouldn't say perpetual motors, but it's magnetic motors that are using the Earth's magnetic field to power the device. Now understand, off planet, that comes from somewhere else, from our sun, with a coupling electromagnetically from our sun, and our sun is also in a string of connectivity to other star systems and galaxies and solar systems. So, we're not alone. The power is coming from elsewhere, but there's no such thing as free power. It's from somewhere else. We could have used all these devices. So here we are in our modern day era, paying for everything that we do, and how much money is left over at the end of the month. This is where the problem lies. This is where the opportunity lies as well. You can have both opportunity and the danger if you look for it carefully enough. Because how much money is left at the end of the month for the average person? If their food prices double, triple, quadruple, as we saw what happened in the modern minimum across Germany and Austria when they recorded the price of barley and rye, if your food price quadruples, that's a very serious problem with the economy, because you're pulling out of the general economy what you would spend on movies, new television, I don't know, cable services, Netflix, whatever it is that people spend their money on, travel, the extra dessert while you're just driving home. Hey, let's stop for a dessert somewhere and a coffee. That disappears. That evaporates straight into a certain segment of the economy, which is going to go hyperbolic straight up in growth. I mean, you're going to see some of the vertical food processors and some of the farm gate type of companies explode in value due to higher food prices. And that's what gets me back into, just before we took the break, I was telling you, and you were talking about the 70-year cycle in the economy. And I was mentioning that a lot of economists are now mapping out these same, what are, economic cycles of beginning to peak to decline and then overlapping it on the grand solar minimum. But here's the thing. There's going to be a mass awakening in a very short amount of time. I would say by the end of 2020, no later. This whole caveat of the corporate media feeding us endless global warming stories, the weather will have shifted so much that it'll be impossible for even the most staunch believer to believe that it's CO2 any longer. Now, when this happens and everybody wakes up at the same time, it's an opportunity for you, but it's danger if you're not prepared as well, because everybody is going to rush to go get food, supplies, get ready to prepare. And I know you're very much on the preparedness side there. So if you could lead us into what happens when there's a mass awakening. Right now, there's probably 20 million people on the planet that understand what's going on. But when it turns into 2 billion in a matter of a year, there's going to be runs on supplies across the planet that our supply chains won't be able to keep up with.
No, you bring up a good point, and I'm not sure that people realize that, and you can certainly verify this, David, but typically during the grand solar minimum or any of the grand solar minimums, if I remember correctly, and this is based largely on your research and that of John Casey and interviews, anything that is above the 45th parallel, I believe there's no crops that will grow at all for many, many years. And the state I'm in, Montana, the entire state, as a matter of fact, the 45th parallel just falls right at the very south end of Montana, between Montana and Wyoming. So the entire state of Montana, where I'm at now, is above the 45th parallel, which historically speaking, there'll be zero crops being able to be grown, on that whole line across the country. So, that's a serious blow, to say the least, to everybody that's above the 45th parallel. They're going to have to get their food from somewhere. Now, I was told, David, and you can certainly, as I said, you can verify this, that I can probably still live in Montana, but it's going to be so costly to live here because everything's going to have to be brought in. And the summertime may be 2-3 weeks long. The growing season will be non-existent, won't matter. And it's going to be, it's going to be a very tough life for those people that decide to stick around, if they can even survive. What's your thoughts, David, about those living above the 45th parallel? Are they going to have to move? Because that's also another feature of the grand solar minimum, large population shifts. Can you touch on those 2 or 3 issues, please?
Well, when you look at that, again, there's one picture painted of that. People are going to need to move. It's going to cost more. Their lives are going to be completely disrupted. Understood. That will happen for some people, percentage. But it also, there's the opportunity end on that, because if you're able to set up, let's say you have a container, shipping container, and you blow foam in there and you can get that thing insulated to the R value for your specific area, and you're starting to grow microgreens and different types of vegetables inside there, even during the winter, you're going to be able to supply fresh greens to people. And especially microgreens have so many nutrients and micronutrients that our bodies need. And this is going to be a huge thing moving forward, because immune systems are going to get depleted so quickly. And again, what about outfitting disused buildings? Because when you talk about the population migration and shifts in population, there's going to be a lot of abandoned real estate out there. Fine, that's an opportunity. Some people go, oh no, everything's being abandoned. It's going to go to zero. Our worth is going to go down in our cities. No, you could actually turn those into vertical grow indoor farms. So the possibilities are endless for the opportunities looking into this, because so many people are going to need probably the most services and the most goods and the most retro outfitting for everything they eat that's ever been recorded in human history, because there's just the most people on the planet right now. That's the thing. The population on the planet is not self-sufficient. They're going to need to get it from somewhere. And if you're able to provide that need, you'll never have to worry about anything for the rest of your life, including safety, wealth, and also your quality of life, because you'll have access to that food in itself. But population migration, and yeah, that's just a part of it. So the three things that always go with the Grand Solar Minimum: population migration, population decline, and also the decline in the economy. So as we move forward, 45 degrees, the last thing I could touch on here before we change a little bit on the subject: 45 degrees north latitude for the United States and Asia, or I should say North America and Asia. 55 north in Europe, because it's slightly different with the Atlantic warming, so they get an extra couple 10 degrees. But the Atlantic Ocean temperatures are cooling, so if that cools down, perhaps at 55 degrees north, where they presently enjoy warmer than average, that, London should be the same temperatures as Moscow, but it's not, just because of the current flows in the Atlantic. If that shuts down, if that changes, if it cools, maybe that 55 north will, pull back to 50 north, or who knows what'll happen. But there's drastic and severe changes, especially in France and Germany, measured every single Grand Solar Minimum, to the point, even up in Sweden, Norway, they abandoned their cities. And they went back, 70 years later, and they were 90% empty. That's the kind of population we're looking at migrating out of these cooler areas. 90% of the people left. 9-0. That's an incredible, astounding number.
That's a lot. That's a lot. Do you think, David, we talked before, we've had numerous discussions about cryptocurrency, excuse me, and the upcoming Grand Solar Minimum, and really the overall Earth changes that I don't think anybody's going to be able to escape. And I'm not saying this is not anything to be fearful of, folks. This is not a fear. That's not a fear-mongering episode. This is just a historical fact that these cycles happen. This is basically the way I like to look at it is, if you were walking down the street and you saw some people upstairs in a 2-story house and they were up there having a party, but the first floor was on fire, wouldn't you yell at them and warn them that there was a fire so they could escape? That's kind of what we're doing here. This isn't really fear-mongering. This is just giving you information, letting you know that this 400-year cycle is coming back around. So, I think preparedness, David, is in order. We can talk certainly about after the next segment. We can talk, about solutions. But this is we just want people to get prepared, because you're seeing some of the weather. I mean, David, I got to believe that the Weather Channel is going to be the most popular channel in the world here pretty soon. It will be. Because everything is going to, and I don't know how to put this, but I think that, we get up in the morning and we see, what's the weather going to be like today? What's the temperature going to be like? And it's going to be nice. Do I need to put a jacket on? But I think the weather is going to become such an important part of people's everyday life that it's going to become the main topic of the conversation here over the next 2 or 3 years. Would you agree?
I would. And, part of this preparedness would be the financial preparedness, excuse me, and then understand where the changes are flowing to. So economic preparedness is part of that. Now, cryptocurrency, I know people are going to say, oh, I don't want to hear about that. It's the mark of the beast, whatever it is. We have to realize, in all honesty here, that the economy is going to collapse. All the money is going to get pulled out, and an enormous amount, not all, but an enormous amount is going to get pulled out of the greater economy, because the food's just going to cost so much. The wealth is going to be, congregated, and right into one little tiny segment of our working stock market and the companies that are out there producing food and some of the transportation systems. But everything else on the periphery is just going to completely collapse. There will be almost no money going into these, what we consider luxuries right now. Even a movie, it was a luxury comparatively to you eating that day. We're going to still need to buy and sell and trade regionally, internationally. There's going to have to be a new medium set up for us to do that because the fiat currencies across the planet are not going to be able to handle the strain. This is when we look at every single fiat currency in history has collapsed, but you'll find that they're more collapsing on the timelines around these grand solar minimums. The value's lost because the government's not intact. The food supply chain's not intact. The transportation and logistics chains not intact. So you can't have all those not working systems and still have a fiat currency functioning at the level it does with that trust from the government. The only reason that you're not writing notes and throwing those papers in a drawer to remember what you wrote down later is because we trust that there's some backing behind that piece of paper, whether it's a green paper, a yellow paper, whatever color it is in individual countries. When that trust is lost in the government, the fiat goes bye-bye, and it always has and it always will. There's going to be a transition medium before everything moves to hash graph. Now, this blockchain where we are now is this intermediate step, but in the future, I don't have exact timeline. I'm going to say 10 years past out, everything's going hash graph. The blockchain is just an intermediate step. But included in that is the cryptocurrency sphere. Now, when you see JP Morgan, like they just came out a couple of days ago with the JP coin, and this was Jamie Dimon's whole marauder bunch that was last year saying, if you even touch crypto, I'm going to fire you on the spot. And here they are. They just unveiled a couple of days ago their own JP coin. It's equal to $1 US. So what they're saying is if you're going to deposit money in their account for any kind of trading that you want to do, you can hold it in crypto as in the JP coin, or you can hold it in your traditional asset base class, whatever that might be for you. But they came out with their own coin. And now you see the sovereign governments across the planet doing the same thing. I don't know how many sovereign nations now. There must be 45, 47, even 50 by now that have released or are releasing their own sovereign coins. It's literally fiat money, but it's backed in the blockchain. It's going to be a separate, I think it's going to be the revaluation and the reset. When the fiat collapses, they'll have all these sovereign coins in place, and they'll say, well, you have a few days or months or weeks or whatever it is to convert your paper money into the new CAD coin, which is the Canadian equivalent of the new Canadian cryptocurrency coin, the CAD coin. Great. And we'll redeem it at 3-to-1. You have to pay 3 present fiat Canadian dollars to get 1 new CAD coin. It's just going to take your wealth again. It's not the CO2 tax taking your wealth. The conversion from our fiat system into something that's, oh, you can still use it. They're going to try to squeeze everybody as much as they can. They're going to try to control the population, decline as much as they can. They're not going to let their power go quietly into the night. That's all I'm going to say. And they're setting all these things up for us.
Sorry to cut you off. Coming up on another break here, David.
Jump in.
If you want to find out more about my channel, you can go to northwestlibertynews.com. That's northwestlibertynews.com, or the same name on YouTube, Northwest Liberty News, Twitter, Facebook. Type in Northwest Liberty News. You'll find me on all those venues. We'll be back with David DuByne from Adapt 2030 after these brief messages here on Red State Talk Radio.
And during these uncertain times, I've teamed up with My Patriot Supply long-term food storage, a nice, affordable starter kit, 2-week food supply, 1,500 calories per day, breakfast, lunch, and dinners, plus the 4-gallon storage containers included in that. This is a good first step in getting more self-sufficient. And if you click through the Prepare with Adapt 2030 page in My Patriot Supply, you can get this starter kit for $75. Please remember there's a limit of 2 per household in this special offer.
But I do want to let you know, for those of you that do rewatch this video, I'm giving away some free stuff. I'm giving away 5 of these advanced water bottles still in the package here, along with an extra filter to go with it. And there's no purchase necessary. All you have to do is go to patriotprepared.com. That's patriotprepared.com, and sign up for the newsletter. And I'll keep track of everyone that signed up from 3 p.m. today for the next 2 weeks. And I'll take 5 names and I'll do a random number generator. I'll pick those 5 names out, but oh wait, there's more. You have 2 chances to win, because at the end of 3 months, I'll put all of the names in all the email addresses, and I'll draw a bigger package for a big food package worth a couple $150 or more. So every 2 weeks, I'll have a new item I'm giving away for free. The next 2 weeks, it's going to be 5 of these Seychelles advanced filtration bottles. As I said, no purchase necessary. Appreciate you supporting us here on Northwest Liberty News. Again, that's patriotprepared.com, and just sign up for the newsletter. That's all you have to do. So we're here with David DuByne from Adapt 2030. And David, we're going to take this last segment here, and we're going to talk, if we can, about some solutions. Because there's nothing we can do about, as I stated, there's nothing we can do about the situation that we're facing, but we certainly can prepare for it. Now, I just talked about going to Patriot Prepared for food. You don't necessarily have to go there. It'd be great if you went there to support this program. You don't even need to really get storable food. You can buy some beans and rice, and you can make your own, storable food kit. I would certainly suggest, a copious amount of water filtration if you can. And something, David. Yeah, I know you're kind of a prepper too, and I've talked about this before on other broadcasts. Without getting, I don't want to get too off color here, but I think people, a lot of times people talk about food and water, but I don't think anybody ever talks about the waste that is produced, after. I mean, there's going to come a point where, just think about it, folks. I mean, we're all adults here, right? If you're eating and drinking, that there's another process that occurs at the other side of that that is very, very dangerous if not disposed of properly. So I would just suggest, I'm not going to name any specific products, but I just want to remind folks that there's that part of the digestive process as well that needs to be addressed. And if it's not addressed in the right way, you and everybody else in your family is going to get sick or worse. David, do you care to comment? I know it's not a very pleasant topic, but do you care to comment on what I just stated about that process, if you don't mind?
Yeah, you can't even move forward without putting that in, because when you think about the basic services that are going to cease as we move along, if you can't flush your toilet, then what? You're going to have to DIY something with bags, or, bags around a bucket, and fill in, leaves and dirt as you go along in layers. But then what happens with that? Where are you going to put that bag once it's semi-full? And you're not going to let it get completely full. So how many backups for these types of waste disposal do you have? Because you need to wash your hands. I don't care how tough of a mountain guy you are, or mountain lady, you're the toughest on the planet. If you can't keep clean, you're going to die. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Cleanliness is going to be a major consideration moving forward as well. You're just talking about water filtration there. If the electricity goes off right now in your house, how are you going to get clean water? How are you going to flush your toilets if the water station, or the sewage station down the road is turned off? Literally, it just lost access to the grid. These are things not a lot of people think about. What's your little kit in the house so you can start an emergency fire? Do you have a lighter laying around? What if everything goes black? Do you even know where to go in your house to find the most basic things? A lighter and a candle, so you can even at least walk around and find other stuff. During that super freeze that came across the United States, and the all-time record coldest temperatures ever recorded in places like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois, these areas, people where they had tens of thousands, and then it turned into hundreds of thousands of people where their power went out during that due to the excessive demand on the grid. Where's the safest place to go? You're going to freeze to death on the first floor. You're going to have to go to the basement and huddle down there and have supplies already ready down in the basement, because as soon as that power goes out, especially if it was at nighttime and you're fumbling around in the dark trying to get to the basement because it's really starting to get cold in the house, it's 50 degrees Fahrenheit below zero outside. I don't care how insulated your home is. If you have no way to heat it, there's so many things to think about moving forward, but cleanliness, Your
Well,
water source, because
let's
other
start
people are
at the
going to
beginning,
dump
Dave.
their stuff in your water source. So you got to think about clean water, filtering water somehow, because some other idiot up there is going to dump their waste in a stream or somewhere. And that's the water that's coming down, that's going to the lake where people are getting their water.
Well, let's start really quick at the beginning, David, and go over a quick checklist. So, of course, you're going to need food, some food items, water, filtration, as we talked about, warm clothes, like you mentioned, or those thermal blankets, something of that nature. Now, I don't know how practical it is. I don't know how long kerosene stays. I don't know if that's even a practical way, because you can't really keep your windows closed and light a kerosene heater in your house and have that burn, because you can't really breathe those fumes in. Then you're going to have to open a window or a door, and that's going to bring more cold air in. And then that's going to cause a security concern, because there's going to be a lot of people, David, that are not going to prepare, and they're going to have to, when people get hungry and they don't have any food, they get a little bit ornery. And after a certain period of time, they get violently ornery. And at a certain, and then in an even longer period of time, they get deadly ornery. So, there's a security risk involved and all that. So there's really, there's more than we can even cover today on this broadcast. And that's probably a good time to announce right now that David and I, we don't have a time set up specifically, but on my other, on my other website, criticaldisclosure.com, David and I are going to start doing some weekly podcasts that are going to be broadcast, that'll be posted on Critical Disclosure and other areas. I'm sure he'll post them on his site as well. But that's how serious that David and I think this situation is, that we need to not only come on shows like this, David, and I know you have your own, you do a great job at your YouTube channel and your podcasts, but we need to really pick, everybody that has knowledge of this needs to do a YouTube video or some sort of a podcast, because, man, the percentage of the population that even know what we're talking about here, David, is, I don't know, what do you think, under 10%, perhaps?
No, it's minuscule at the moment, but it's growing in traction every day. And, just take a little step back for everybody watching and listening. Forget the doom and gloom part. That's at the far end of the spectrum when this thing starts to unravel. If you come up into the present day, food's going to get more expensive. You can supplement your food. You don't have to live completely off what you stored. They'll still be available in supermarkets and places, fresh markets, wherever you go purchase your food items. The supply chain is going to continue. The problem is it's going to get more expensive day by day, month by month, year by year. The supply chain will stay intact for quite a bit longer because businesses are still going to want to stay operational. And even during the depths of the Maunder minimum, government overthrows happening everywhere, but the private companies kept on trucking, literally wagoning during that time. But by ship delivery and by wagon delivery, those multinationals at that time, that was the basic, with the explorations and governments sending out, their contingents to go check around the planet. There was a lot of commerce set up at that time, and the corporations survived, the governments didn't. That's the heads up for you. The supply chain is going to stay in place. Things are going to go to rail delivery. So here's another caveat. As global connectivity decreases as we get deeper into the Grand Solar Minimum, things are going to shift to a regional basis. You're not going to be able to get a lot of products from overseas, especially foodstuffs. Now understand that the cheapest way to move things around the country is rail line. And it just, I read years ago, it was about 2.5, 3 years ago, Warren Buffett had acquired an enormous amount of rail capacity. I think he bought up 85% of all rail traffic and companies in the United States. He knows what's going on. So if you understand that everything's going to be delivered by rail in the future, your location or relocation spot, if you were along a rail hub, that would be just like being along a port or an airport or something right now where you could get goods in, because that's going to be the first stop when something moves from out of state or out of county right into your place. It's going to stop there first. So think about where the locations where your food comes in. Do you even know the food supply chain in your cities? Where are the warehouses where they keep the food when it does come in by rail, by truck? Where is that place? Where's the seed wholesaler? Where can you get these types of long-term food storage if you're going to do it yourself? Like you talked about, where do you buy a food dehydrator? Are other people in your neighborhood or community doing the same thing? Where are the nurseries at? The people who are actually growing the plants? What about the government co-ops and ag co-ops that are out there to help you? Do you know any of this? This should be your first stop to actually go talk to them about the changes, because all the farmers are seeing it. Private insurance companies aren't even insuring farms anymore, especially I think it was Oklahoma, Kansas, and there was one other state that they're now relying on government assistance because the local private insurers are taking too much of a hit on the losses for payouts due to claims that they stopped insuring the farmers this year in Canada as well. So now they're looking for government assistance for the program for insurance. All these things are here, and there's so many opportunities. You just have to look for it. But the way you set up this food that you have now, you can just trickle it in. You're not going to rely 100% on what you stored. You may never have to rely 100% on what you stored for long-term food storage, but you could that's a supplement into what you can get in your daily life. That's it. We're not going to go down to Mad Max where everybody's eating the last tin of what they bought. That's not going to happen, at least in my opinion.
No, but financially speaking, David, you can lock in food prices.
Yes, that's the key.
If you were to buy things like storable food or a year's supply of storable food for your family, at least you've locked those food prices in right now for something that is going to, and then not to mention the fact that you've got some barter items. You've got some items for bartering as well. Even if you don't think you're going to need that much food, other people will. There'll be plenty of people. I would say plenty of people is probably not the right term. The majority,
plethora
of the majority of the people will probably not be prepared. And David, it's the issue is that we're so used to this, getting up and just going to the local grocery store and having everything there. We've become kind of used to that, and it's good that we are. Those are great modern conveniences, and we've developed as a society to be able to have that kind of a lifestyle. But if things go back to the old way, we're gonna have to pull up our bootstraps, so to speak. And we're gonna survive. It's not like the civilization is going to go away or die. It's just gonna be tough. It's gonna be cold and tough for quite some time. David, we're under 3 minutes here left on the broadcast. Why don't you take some time, if you can, to talk about all your great work and where people can find out more about you. You have your YouTube channel, I know, and you do regular podcasts. Why don't you take a couple of minutes here and tell us where we can find out more about your work?
All right, thanks. And as I ramble, please give me a time check when we get down to about a minute or 30 seconds. You can find more of my work on Adapt 2030. That's ADAPT, because we really do truly need to readapt our society by 2030 in terms of the way we grow foods individually. You're going to have to grow a garden. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Number one thing, skill set you can learn, growing your own food. That's going to be the essential. We're going to revert back to something like the 1930s grandparents era where you had to grow everything yourself, or what you could get from the market. Everybody's going to have to grow food, period. You're going to have to learn about more of your own safety, as police services are not going to be there. Or if the government can't pay the police, they're just simply not going to work. We see so many instances of that around the world. I talk in depth more about this 30 minutes at a time on my podcast, Mini Ice Age Conversations. And you can find that anywhere podcasts are hosted across the net. The website is oilseedcrops.org, but I'm shifting over to a new site as well. So it's a stripped down version. I'm trying to rebuild it a little bit slowly here. I've just moved into a new place. I have a couple 100 square foot balcony that I'm going to do vertical gardening, and we're going to kit that thing out to show that even in an urban environment here in Asia, in a city with the right location, that you can grow more than enough vegetables for yourself, enough to trade with others. And my whole thing is, you talked about bartering. I don't want to sell the microgreens to restaurants. I want to barter. So my whole premise on growing as much food as I can on the balcony is to see what I can trade for it. I don't want the money. The money's worthless. Think about it in your mind. Money's worthless. Think of a different way to get through your daily lives to be able to accrue the things you need to stay alive. So that's my whole test plot here, is growing it out vertically as well as stepped gardening and trading everything for that. But think about the solutions as well. Where's your opportunity in this? Where's your niche? So many changes are coming. People are going to be out there floating without a rudder. They're going to need help. So how can you help them? What's your strength that you can use as a service to barter or actually get money for moving forward to help people transition into this new greatest changes in our lives?
There we go, David. Coming to the end of the broadcast here. So much
Thanks
appreciate you joining. No, thank you. So much appreciate you joining us here on Northwest Liberty News. And again, that's Adapt 2030 YouTube channel. And you can find out more about this broadcast and what I got going on at northwestlibertynews.com. That's Northwest Liberty News. And please go to the YouTube channel and like the videos and subscribe if you can. For David DuByne, my guest, this is James White from Northwest Liberty News saying, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, same station.
再见。